Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sales Ops Effect. And you're talking with me, Charlene Thompson. And we have today with us Rosie Murphy. And we're going to be talking about the titillating subject of fraud. You're going to have to stay with me because we're going to have a good old human conversation about it rather than it just be two people reading from a newspaper. Okay. So stick with us because we're in business and it's one of those things that we don't always think about. It can be really difficult to think about what would happen if it goes wrong. It's like even in project management, there's a whole section of being a project management professional that's about risk management, you know? So we're going to have this discussion and we'll have it in a way that won't irritate the daylights out of you. So I'm really glad to have you here, Rosie. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you, Charlene. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's really nice to be here.
Fantastic. And Rosie does full service accounts, right? So, if you've been doing your own accounts, you don't need to be doing your own accounts. I would strongly recommend you get somebody else to sort out your own accounts. Even if you do your own bookkeeping, get somebody else to do your own accounts. I have had those troubles before where I've missed something. So there's my strong recommendation there to go and find yourself an accountant. So, Rosie, what on earth got you into paying more attention to fraud? Like what was it about fraud that tickled your fancy?
So for me, it was because I read a lot of crime fiction and I found just generally crime and law enforcement and fighting crime really interesting. So that is what made me start to think about fraud because it related to my industry that I was already in, which is the accountancy. And also the fact that I see it quite a lot in my day-to-day workings as an accountant. It's not unusual for me to query a big chunk of money that's left somebody's bank account and for them to tell me, oh, I was scammed. So I do actually see it fairly regularly as well.
So by fairly regularly, if I can actually speak, what are we talking about then? Like how many times a month do you see something and you're like, and then it turns out to be somebody's coming after something, like a burglar.
So it's probably a handful of times a year, but what is interesting actually with fraud crime in particular is it's really really underreported. So actually the stories that you might hear about is only about 1 in 7 fraud cases are actually reported. So I think in I think to a degree people try to hide it because they feel embarrassed about being scammed, which I think is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, 1 in 7 being reported. That's what I thought. People must be embarrassed. I mean, like, at what point do you even realize that you've been taken advantage of? Because sometimes it's not the first payment that goes out, it's a few payments over time and you haven't received the stuff. So, you know,
Yes, yeah. It might take some people a little while for the penny to drop, especially actually, I mean, it's slightly off topic from what I do, but the romance scams is a
okay.
massive
Do
is
go on,
massive
please.
fraud. So that is basically when you are doing online dating and you meet somebody and you hit it off and you build a relationship with them, and then they start asking you for money. Perhaps there's been a family tragedy and they're desperate for some cash. It's normally those sort of circumstances. So these scammers will build up relationships with people, normally quite vulnerable, lonely people who are seeking connection with others, which is why they're doing the online dating anyway. And yeah, so it can be quite a long time before these people even realize that they're being taken advantage of.
See, and this is the reason, again, why we're having this discussion on the sales ops effect, because most people will be dating at some point, unless you're
Mm,
actively choosing to live life solitarily. And when you're running your own business or you're one of the big wigs in a business, we don't necessarily have the same amount of time or necessarily the same amount of the same kind of circles where we would want to be dating. So we'll end up going to online dating because it's so much more popular than it was back in the
mm.
day. And then, particularly if you've been lonely for a little while, then you might be more vulnerable. And then now look. I mean, that's really raw. That does it, does
Yeah.
it? Do you find it affects the people, like people who are defrauded, if that's the word, are of a certain age? Is there any correlation between any demographic or any characteristic or anything like that?
Not as far as I know, but what I would say with going back to business fraud more generally is the majority of people will be affected at some point. So there is an extremely high chance that I will be targeted or somebody will attempt to target me at some point. The same for you and the same for everyone else watching. So I think actually we are all vulnerable at the end of the day.
Mm. And then, so what does it look like when, like, do businesses defraud other businesses? Have you ever seen anything like that, rather than it just feeling like as if it's a circle of scammers somewhere in an unknown island?
Yeah. So one way that businesses are defrauded is through invoice fraud. So that could be something as simple as one of your contractors adding an extra couple of hours onto their invoice. It could be something like, so especially with the slightly bigger businesses that have a lot of transactions going on. It could be something like a business which appears quite legitimate, sending an invoice over to another company to invoice them for some work. And actually, they never did any work. It's just a scam invoice. And if you have a big company and you don't have systems in place to manage that, people can end up paying these invoices without even giving it any thought. And that type of invoice fraud is really, really big.
I didn't even consider that. I mean, I'm not a criminal, so my mind doesn't think that way, but
Well, I've actually had this before because I had a job in quite a big company as the finance manager. And I got an email through one day from supposedly from a colleague, and it was an invoice attached to this email for around about 10 grand, which is, it's a significant amount of money, but for this particular company, it wasn't unusual. And it was telling me that I needed to pay it urgently, and could I let them know once it had been paid, and it had to be paid that day. And I was actually in the process of setting up the payment because it looked so genuine, like it came from this particular person who also worked within the business, but something stopped me from paying that. And I ended up giving them a call and asked them if they'd sent me this invoice and what it was for, and they said no, absolutely nothing to do with me at all. And their account had been hacked, and then they'd used that to target me as the finance person in that business, and I was so close to paying that invoice, and it would
oh,
have lost the company like thousands of pounds.
and those you might think that's larger businesses, but that can be just the same for smaller businesses, micro businesses as well. You can be hacked and then somebody can just be impersonating you.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it doesn't get reported. Who are people supposed to report it to? I know that seems like a silly question, but genuinely, like, would people think to go to the police?
Well, I'm not sure if they would think to go to the police, but ultimately that is where you would report it. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
and there is a specific fraud agency as well that you can report it to.
Oh, I'll have to look that up.
I'd have to have a look at the details of that. But yeah, if you think you've been a victim of fraud, report it to the police as your first step.
Oh gosh, so that would be 111 or something like that. But if we can find the link, then
Yeah,
we'll add that to the show notes and maybe make a
cool.
note of that
Yeah.
now. Okay. So then thinking about prevention, then what would you recommend for, let's start with solopreneurs, or micro business owners, teeny tiny companies that
Mhm.
can't afford to get big old lawyers and things like that to deal with things after the fact. How would they protect themselves?
I think the easiest thing that you can do to start off with is strong passwords. And I know that people have heard this time and time and time again, and it's really boring, but it is so easy to get complacent with your passwords and to not change them and to use the same password for multiple different accounts. So that is a really quick, easy, and free way of increasing your security. So that's a really good one to start with. The next thing I would suggest doing, which again is free, it just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, is to keep your apps and your systems updated. So the majority of the time, when, say, for example, eBay or Vinted or PayPal has an upgrade to their app, that will be because they've enhanced their security features. So they won't necessarily tell you that, but they are always working behind the scenes to keep your accounts and your money secure. And they can't help you if you don't download the updated version of the app. So it's really, really important to do that as well.
That's
And
cool.
obviously to have a firewall as well on your computer.
Do you know what? I was big on like Norton back in the day, you know, when you had like CDs and things like that that you actually had to put into the computer. And then for years, I think I just
Mm,
used AVG for free. And now I've got, I'm not going to say which one actually, but now I've got one that I do pay for and I've paid for the last couple of years. And for the longest time, I
yeah.
don't know why. I kind of just didn't worry about security anymore. You
Mm,
know, I kind of felt like as if, oh, my business is so small, nobody would be coming after me to try my
yeah.
stuff. But that's not true. I had somebody trying to hack into my Facebook account every single month for a year.
Yeah.
It was almost like clockwork to the day. It was like the 21st of the month, and they would try it. And I was like, who are you? I don't even use the account that much. What's the
Mm,
matter?
yeah.
You know? But yeah. Yeah, no, that is
Yeah.
super important. So yeah, we want to
Um,
be keeping up our passwords and keeping up our
yeah.
security as
And I
well. And
think
then
um,
how do you spot how would people spot fraud then if they're getting an invoice or something dodgy from other people, do you think?
I think if you work for yourself, that kind of thing is slightly easier to detect because you'll be
Mm.
sent the invoices, you'll be paying the invoices. That is more of a risk to bigger companies where they maybe have a team or even a VA or something. You know, a lot of people are using
Mm.
VAs now. You know, I think there you need to make sure that there's a process in place for invoices to be approved
Yeah. Yeah.
would be the method for reducing that
Can't farm
threat.
out everything. And also check those ones that if you're getting anything that's coming through from HMRC, check the email address.
Yeah, I mean, there's always loads of HMRC scams
I know,
going
but
around.
it's so like you're already thinking about so many things when you're running your own business, and it can be so
I
scary.
know.
So to then get an email, because back in the days they didn't really email you all that much. Now you can choose for them to contact you only by email. You know, you used to kind of think, well, government sends you a letter. Now, because you do actually get emails from HMRC, it's just
Yeah,
like, is this real? And the way it can set off your nervous system, spike your
it's
blood
always
pressure.
worth it's always worth checking though, I think is the bottom line. And
Yeah.
another one actually that I've seen recently is a company's house scam. And that is people who've recently registered limited companies have been receiving letters supposedly from company's house asking for a payment to complete the registration process. And if they don't pay, there will
Mm.
be loads of consequences and they'll be fined and they'll never be able to be a director of a company again. And urging people to take urgent action. You must deal with this straight away. And it's just completely false. When you set up a company, you pay there and then as you're doing it, and then that's
Yeah.
it. So if you've done this recently and you receive a letter in the post within a couple of weeks later, chances are that that won't be legitimate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, for the larger businesses, again, you were saying they need to have their invoicing checking process in place.
Mm, yeah.
Is there anything else that they can do to make sure that they're not going to be defrauded?
So so what unfortunately a massive area of fraud in slightly larger businesses is actually employee fraud.
Oh,
So it's important to not just look externally and think about the cyber crime and those type of scammers, but also
mm,
to look a little bit closer to home as well. So one thing that you can do to prevent that is to make sure that you segregate the duties. So I'll give you an example of this. When I had that finance manager role that I mentioned earlier, I did absolutely everything. I had access to all the bank accounts. I paid all the invoices. I did all the bookkeeping. I did all the reports for the directors. Nobody else had any kind of input into any of the finance function. So it would have been incredibly easy for me to have just paid myself little extra bits of money, or maybe funneled, or maybe come up with a fake invoice like I was saying earlier, and just put it in the system, and um paid my into my boyfriend's bank account or something, and nobody would have picked up on that because I did absolutely everything. So segregating the duties and rotating the duties as well. So have different people doing different things, and then swap people around maybe every 6 months or every year or something.
You know what? And this is when I talk about as well the building in resilience into processes, which again can seem like a dry topic, but my word, when correct processes aren't in place, you have things like fraud that happens.
Mm.
And even if you can't move people around because there's only so many people, then there still needs to be a check and balance. Find a way to make it super simple, to look at stuff. If you know that you have roughly X amount that goes out every month, if the amount that's going out every month is above a certain amount, maybe do an
Yeah,
extra look, you know,
yeah, that's a really good idea.
you
Yeah,
know, because if somebody's taking out an extra £30 here or there, it's still not good, but that's not going to cripple your business, But 3,000, 300,000.
yeah. I think with that type of fraud is it tends to be little and often, which is why it goes unnoticed. So actually it might be the £30 here and there, but over the
Mm.
course of a year it can add up to quite a significant amount. I was actually speaking to somebody recently that had this. They had a young girl working for, it was actually a charity. I think it might have been a cat sanctuary, and
Stole from
she
oh
had
my
been
goodness.
taking the odd 10, £20 here and there out of petty cash, and it took a very long time for anyone to notice. And actually that
Mm-mm.
was interesting as well because they didn't report that, and I asked the guy I was speaking to why it didn't get reported, and it was the family. Basically the family of this girl begged them not to report it,
Did they
and
give back the money?
agreed to pay some. Yeah, yeah, and agreed to pay some of the money back. So people get away with it because of, you know,
I think it doesn't matter. But
they're
again,
made to
even
feel
that.
bad, I think, about reporting it.
Yeah. So for that, in terms of how do you build that in for a process, if it's little and often, then maybe depending on whatever system that you're using, if you see a name that's coming up really frequently and you don't recognize what it is, so more than 3 months in a row, and again, this is for the smaller businesses, then just go and take a look. You see,
Mm,
every quarter, just go and take a look at the ones where I don't know what that is. Let me go and look as the person that's signing it off. Because then you might, it might be 3 months worth of something, but it's only 3 months, it's not 2 years.
yeah, yeah. And actually another really good deterrent. So you quite often see those signs in shops saying shoplifters will be prosecuted. And
Mm.
actually, to bring that kind of mentality into your business is really useful. So make sure all your staff know what is considered fraud and what the consequences will be if they are found to commit fraud against the business, and then to actually follow through with that. So make it really clear up front, make sure everyone knows that it won't be tolerated under any circumstances, and then actually report people if they're found to do it is quite a good deterrent.
And hold people accountable at every single level. If there's one thing
Yeah.
that I can see a lot of businesses are failing with, and I know it's, tough to hear it, but it's accountability at every single level. Because it's all well
Mm,
and good having, really thorough and legally binding rules in the contract that everybody has to sign and agree to. But as and when a senior person decides that they want to completely tear it up and do strange things, and I've suffered from this personally, where one of my managers literally just started making up rumors trying to get me fired.
mm,
Was not fired himself. Like that causes untold harm. So it's not
yeah.
just fraud, it's everything. It's these rules are there for a reason because when they're not there, then it's a free for all. And then if you do have the rules and you don't apply them, you don't hold everybody accountable to the same level appropriately,
Mm,
then you don't have any trust. Which means what else is going to happen? You think you had fraud
mm,
problems now?
yeah.
Oh gosh. So in closing then, what are the top three tips that are at the top of your mind that you think it would be good for people to walk away? knowing about fraud and how they can protect themselves?
So learn more about it,
Mm.
because the chances are somebody will try to target you at some point. And as a business, you are more vulnerable than an individual. So do the passwords, change all your passwords. I'm going to say that again because that is really, really, really important. And look at your processes. Do a risk assessment. Go away and do a risk assessment. Look at the areas where you might be vulnerable and brainstorm ways to reduce that risk, and then implement those things that you've come up with in the risk assessment.
Yeah,
So
better to do
yeah,
it
they would
beforehand.
be my three things to go away and do.
Thanks so much. It's better to, if you know you might be at risk of fire, it's better to have a fire extinguisher and fire blankets in the house beforehand rather than after the fire has been set up and then you
Yeah,
try and go down the road and buy one. You know,
exactly.
because that's not going to help. But thank you so much, Rosie. Where can people learn more about you and your business?
So on my website, rdmaccountancy.co.uk, and also on my Facebook page and my LinkedIn as well. I will try and get a little bit better with posting on there.
No problem,
Thank you
no
very
problem.
much for having me
You're very,
today.
very welcome. You're very welcome. And folks, as well, one of the things that I have launched recently is the 6 week sales system setup. I probably need a shorter title for that service. This
Mhm.
service is for solopreneurs. It's like a advanced tune-up and it's steered towards sorting out your technology. But as you know, with me, technology isn't the only thing. It's weaving in your people, your processes to make sure that everything is aligned properly. So if you've got that CRM system, you're having trouble with automations, you're having trouble connecting this to that, you're paying for it, but you don't think you're using it properly. Over the course of those 6 weeks, one-on-one, I'll sort it out for you. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes as well, because where it's one-on-one, it's by application only. There's only so many people that I can work with, but I'm very much looking forward to working with you if you want to be working with me. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Thank you, Rosie, for being here. I'm glad we had this conversation. It is one that needs to be had. And I hope you all have fantastic weeks. We will talk again very soon. Bye bye.
Bye.